All right, and we're back. It is COMP125, that's client-side web development, and it's week 8. We're back from a bit of a break. Some of us had a break anyway. Some of us didn't. Some of us working on other things, and that's totally fine. We're starting off a new topic today, and we put this topic up on eCentennial for you as well, and it is object-oriented JavaScript. Now, up until now, we've been talking about some really basic things. All right, like look at our little exam. We did, input and output. All right, and some people had real trouble with that. And there's some problem with laying out things and how to put things together, how to pass data into arrays. Some people use different structures, whatever. Anyways, at the end of the day, most of you got it pretty, did pretty good. Like I said, now we're entering some stuff where we're talking about object orientation, and I want to point out that JavaScript is object-oriented, but it's not the way you're used to. For those people who've taken C#, and I think most of you are, into programming 1, 2, 3, or have done programming 1, 2, 3, right? Which is programming 2, right? COMP123, I mean. With C#, and you're learning object-oriented programming and so on. You just kind of figured out what classes and objects are. You can't look at classes and objects in C# or another object-oriented language, a C-style object-oriented language like Java or C# or something else, and look at JavaScript and go, okay, I get it. It's not the same way of doing things as you're used to. Okay, so what I mean by that is there is no, in the latest version of JavaScript, that's ECMAScript 6. Let me just go back to that for a second. So if I go to ECMAScript 6, which is actually ECMAScript 2015 now, is what it's called. All right, and again, JavaScript is based on a, kind of this, standard ECMAScript, right? Which actually a lot of other C-style languages are based on as well. So ECMAScript 6 uses classes the way we're used to, but ECMAScript 5, which is what we use right now, if I go to ECMAScript 6, you might see something like this. ECMAScript uses the class keyword. That's nice, but ECMAScript 5 does not. Okay, ECMAScript 5 looks like this. This is what a class would look like in ECMAScript 6. ECMAScript 5 is kind of ugly, right? We're going to talk about the ugly stuff today. We're still working on ECMAScript 5, right? That's the version of JavaScript we've been talking about so far today, right? Why? Because ECMAScript 6 is not supported across all browsers. All right, I got to point this out before we start the discussion of object-oriented JavaScript. By the way, just from an administration perspective this week, we're not doing a quiz this week. It'll be next week. So next week it'll happen on Wednesday, right? This week is a lab that I'll be giving to you on Wednesday. That'll be due Friday. Okay, that's what's happening. And I'll also probably give you your assignment number 3. I think it is, right? So just administration stuff to mention that. So if you look at this as an example, I'm just doing this that's online. Usually, we have a book. This is why, computers and books. I don't know. I can produce a book today, and 3 months from now, it's obsolete, right? Unfortunately. And the reason why we just talked about this with some of our friends here, that things keep moving on the web so much and so quickly that it's hard to keep up with all the changes. Okay, that's the way, and that's why the web is one of the most, in my opinion, probably the most difficult platform to learn and keep up with, because things constantly change. Whereas C# or Java, they change, but it's slow and progressive, right? Web is like crazy nonstop changes. So today I'll tell you something that works. It worked last week, and today it won't work. Like, just the way it is, right? So please don't be upset about it. It's just the way it is. So object-oriented or style, like the way we did classes and objects that you're used to, you might see it like this. You might think of it like this. Well, it's like this. And if I wanted to look at thing is, can I use? If I go to caniuse.com, which is, I always check caniuse.com, and if I look at for example, class, the word class, and if I look down, there's a bunch of objects that I can use for like if I go ES6, if I go ES6 number or ES6 classes and objects. Like, for example, the let keyword is a new keyword that's available in ECMAScript 6. It's different than var in that it allows a variable to have block level scope, where var does not. Okay, var is kind of, we want to stop using var eventually. The var keyword that we use to declare variables now that we've been learning all up until now, right, it's a bad word, right? But we have to learn that, because when you look at examples on the web, you're going to see var, var, var everywhere for old JavaScript, right? And I say old, now ECMAScript 5. ECMAScript 6, as you can see, uses let, right? Here's a feature that's part of it, and you can see that it's supported in Chrome nicely, right? Old versions of Safari, no. Opera, yes. And definitely not available in iOS Safari, but it is starting to get recognized on the Chrome browser. Look at the penetration globally, 60%. That means like 40% of my clients want the let keyword. If I use let as an example, browsers won't know what to do with that, right? So why would I start using ECMAScript 6 across my, how I code? And the answer is probably not right now. I wouldn't use it. I'd probably use something like this. I'd probably use ECMAScript 5, right? That would be the last version of JavaScript with some kind of transpiler. So I would probably write things nicely in ECMAScript 6, beautiful class and object, transpile something with another piece of program, and then convert it, emit it in ECMAScript 5, so that it would work across browsers, across everything else. Like, for example, if I put the var keyword, which is what we're used to, var, right? Or JavaScript. If I look at JavaScript, just regular JavaScript, how much is acceptable. This is right. Let's go back to ES6 for a second. The var keywords are compatible across all browsers, right? Whereas some of these other functions, arrow functions, here's another one, arrow functions. This is a new thing that came with, which looks like this syntax, right? Look, it's not even a IE, Edge, IE is not compatible. Edge, yes. But again, on iOS Safari, on devices, mobile devices, no, some of them, right? And again, you get a 57%, compatibility. Why would I use something like that? That means that 40% of my clients can't see my stuff. That's not good, right? So I would use some kind of conversion code to make it work like that. Const, we have the const keyword that's coming in. Why? Because we're more aligning towards, and by the way, it's mostly compatible. You can see this one's not bad to use. If I was going to use the const keyword, chances are 93% penetration across the world. In Canada, around the same amount. I think we're pretty good to use the const keyword, right? And the latest versions of iOS probably can support it, so I think we're okay. If I was going to use the const keyword today, constant, that's what it means, I'm okay, right? With block level scope. Let, not so much. And you can keep going down the line to see what ECMAScript 2016 or 2015 compatibility issues would be like. Here's an example of another map with ECMAScript 6 and compatibility with the latest version of ECMAScript, const, and so on. You can see. One of the things I use a lot, which I'm going to be talking about at some point in this course, is something called Typescript, right? I can build enterprise-level applications with Typescript. I think I showed you guys, the game that I built. No? No? Okay. So with Typescript, you can build all kinds of stuff. You can make it object-oriented. I can break it up over several modules. You can do all kinds of stuff with it. And at the back end, it'll convert to ECMAScript 5, which is 100% compatible pretty much with most modern browsers, right? And I think it's called Starbase 12. There we go. This is a game I built purely with JavaScript. I think I showed you guys this, no? I did? Yeah, C#. So this one here is built with pure JavaScript. And like I said, see that loader? That was the loader that I used, right? But and I don't want to show this off too much, but the idea here is that you can build things with, if I was going to do an inspect, this is where I really want to show you guys what I'm talking about here. You can see that these are all the JavaScript libraries I built. So all the JavaScript code is right in here. And if I was to look at my sources, I've broken it out into several scripts where I have different modules. Like, for example, in my objects, here are all the objects I built. These are all custom built by myself. And if you notice, they have a TS extension for TypeScript. Well, I can build it in TypeScript. I have a compiler, and it compiles it to pure JavaScript. We're going to talk about this later on. Can't do this now. This is like, I'm just telling you that if I want to build really beautiful code with JavaScript, you can, and it'll look nice. And as a developer, you'll love it, right? But we need to look at the ugly stuff first. So let's do that today. Let's look at the ugly first, and then we'll look at the beautiful later, right? Because you need to understand the ugly stuff before you can appreciate the beautiful. Otherwise, you'll sit there and go, I don't know. Why would I ever program in JavaScript? Might as well use TypeScript all the time. Yes, it's true. You can use TypeScript all the time. But this is a JavaScript course, right? You need to know how to look at JavaScript and understand what JavaScript is. And if I just showed you TypeScript from the very beginning, I would kind of rob you of that. All right, so let's go back. So this is what, so compatibility is really important to understand, especially with language. And this is a great little chart about what's compatible cross-browser and what ways we can use to transpile. Here's compilers and polyfills. Babylon, as an example, is another, or Babel, sorry, compiler. TypeScript is another one. And there's other ones that we can use here to transpile from an object-oriented language to ECMAScript 5. Okay. Yay. Let's get into the heart of this thing. So when I start looking at it, we want to look at this object-oriented approach. We're going to look at a few objects that are built into JavaScript. We've talked about some of these already. We haven't really talked too much about the date object. Math, we have talked about math. Like, for example, we did math at random. We did random number functions, right? We did with math. So we're going to do some more of that. And the same thing with the number functions that we're going to find. By the way, this PowerPoint is up on eCentennial, like I said. You can always view it. So when we start using object-oriented programming techniques, we're going to talk about some stuff that's, when we talk about reusing software, that's what we're talking about when we talk object-oriented programming, right? So we'll do a little bit of, you know, soft words around what it is. And then we'll do a demo and show you what I'm talking about here, right? The stuff you learned when it came to C# is slightly different than the stuff you're going to do here, because when we do inheritance with a C-style, C-influenced language like Java or C#, we have a class, and then we have a subclass, like parent and child class, right? That one inherits from the other. It's not like that here. We don't use classical inheritance in JavaScript. We use something called prototypal inheritance. We make a prototype, and then we inherit from the prototype to make our custom objects, okay? It's a totally different way of doing things. And very confusing if you've never seen it before. You're gonna look at it and go, why, who, what person thought about this structure? You know, why was it done this way? Well, it makes JavaScript very, very flexible, but it also makes it very ugly at times, right? It looks like spaghetti code, and I'm sure you've heard professors say that before, right? So here's some popular object-oriented programming languages we've talked about before: C++, Java, Visual Basic, C#, right? Sorry, I had to remark on this one. Ooh, okay, I'm trying. And this is examples of what we do. We have objects I create, objects created by other programmers. You smash them together, and you get your program, right? That's really what happens. Objects created by other programmers, or the standards JavaScript library, for example, the math object, the math class, if you will. This static class that I can use over and over again is something that we use a lot. Date class, and sort of the date object. We're gonna investigate some of those things in this section. The idea of encapsulation, that's part of what object-oriented programming is. We've talked about that in C#, but really the idea is all around information hiding. The idea that what I'm using, the object that I'm using, is a black box. I don't know how it works in the background. I don't really care. All I care is when I put input into it, I get output from it somehow, some kind of output, right? A black box. We don't know what it is, but we just know it works, okay? And we're happy, right? Because, you know, get into your car, you turn the car on, you push the accelerator, it drives forward. You turn the wheel, it turns left. We don't know how it works, but it works. We're happy, right? And that's the idea with encapsulation. We don't know how. It's a black box. We just use it. And the idea of an interface is, how do we communicate with this object? Is there some kind of method that I need to use? Do I have to pass in parameters, values, you know, that kind of stuff? How do I work with this object? And a lot of these built-in objects we're going to be talking about have something called, you know, an API documentation, some kind of API documentation, right? That's associated with the object. So, for example, API means the application programming interface. So some kind of interface, right? Some kind of description of how to use my built-in objects. W3 Schools, I've been using that a lot over this session that we're together, right? I use it because it's a quick and dirty way of looking at the standard JavaScript, but it exists everywhere. If you really want to look at, like, you know, standard JavaScript API documentation, how to use the math class or whatever, it's all up online, and it's probably some of the best documentation you can get. Like I said, for JavaScript and web-based technologies, things change so much. The online stuff is sometimes more recent than the stuff in a book, right? So we have to kind of balance that with our book resources. So let's take a look. If I say something like, I want to look at the math class, right? JavaScript, right? Then look what it takes me to, JavaScript math object on W3 Schools. The W3 Schools is an open source, free library that we can use, and it tells us about the math object, right? And it gives us examples on how to use it. We've used this before, math.random, right? Which generates a pseudo-random number between 0 and 1, right? And there's other values here too, min and max, right? So we see these, whenever we see this, we know this is a method or some kind of function that's attached to the math object, right? So whatever the object is, it's a static object. I don't have to instantiate the math. I don't have to say my math is equal to new math. I don't have to do that, right? I don't have to use a new keyword at all, right? It's a static object or static class that I use a method, and the method is a utility method. It gives me back an output. That's what I'm using, right? So min does the minimum from a bunch of different values. It gives you the minimum value. That's a pretty useful one. Max, the maximum one. So I want to find which one's the maximum value of all these different values. It tells me what the maximum value is, and so on, right? Math.random, math.round, math.ceiling, and math.floor. Ceiling is kind of, it rounds up. Floor rounds down. I use floor a lot. When I do random numbers, I use math.floor, right? And the reason why is because I want to round down, okay? Rounding is fine any way you want it. The reason why is because if you don't use some kind of math.floor or math.ceiling, what's going to happen is you're going to get a number between, because numbers are going to be a floating point number between 0 and 1, right? So it's going to be 0.0.13568 whatever it is. It's too many numbers, and I want to be able to make it more of an integer type number. There's a bunch of math constants that we show here up online. By the way, all this stuff is captured on the PowerPoint as well, right? Because it talks about this. But there's a bunch of math constants. Like for example, pi. We use pi a lot when it comes to calculating angles, right? In radians, right? So square roots and other things, and lots of math functions. Like for example, the power function, which I use a lot. I want to find the distance between 2 points. Math.power, right? Because I can kind of say math.power. It's x2 minus x1, right, squared, plus y2 minus y1 squared, square root of, right? And then you get the distance between 2 points. That kind of stuff. You can do all kinds of math functions that are built in. You don't have to make the function yourself. Don't reinvent the wheel if it's already done for you. And they're pretty efficient, these things, right? So it's not so bad from a JavaScript perspective. So you have all these different built-in functions in math. And I think it's just like anything else. If you're a programmer and you're looking at a new language for the first time, you got to figure out, what can I do? Once you know that you can do it in the language, then it's going to click in your brain when you need to do some kind of calculation. You're going to say, okay, well, I want to do some kind of calculation. Do I make my calculation myself? Well, hold on a second. We have a math library. Let's take a look, right? And it's better to do it that way by far than to try and make it on your own a lot of times, because it's built in. Sometimes you may want to extend what's already here and make it your own function or whatever that extends one of these ones, and you can certainly do that as well. So again, going back to the PowerPoint, if we can use our own methods and we can use other people's methods to smash them together or combine them to create our own little program that's functional, right? Yes? No. Only because JavaScript there is no overriding. It's not like that. You'd have to rewrite them, right, completely. So you could use the same names, but you would have to completely rewrite them. It's not the same as overriding, right? Although it serves a very simple function. Okay, so this talks about advantages and disadvantages of encapsulation. I'm not going to go in too much into detail. You guys know about encapsulation from C# and other object-oriented languages, so I'm not going to talk about too much of this. One of the disadvantages of encapsulation is that you don't know what's inside the object, and as developers, we like to know. We like to figure out what's inside. And it talks in detail about what encapsulation is. I'm not going to test you on encapsulation because, again, it's kind of overlapping. Why would I test you on object-oriented practice again in JavaScript when you've already just taken it in C#? So I want you to know that we still follow this whole black box example when we do object orientation in JavaScript. but you don't necessarily need to, as an example, I'm not going to test you on it in a quiz or anything like that. It's not going to happen. Same thing with this. When we say understanding classes, there's the same conventions: classes, instance, instantiate. We're going to use the same words that we use in C# and in Java, if you're familiar with those languages, here in JavaScript. So when I say class, a group of code, methods, and so on, you know what that means. Instance means kind of an image of the class, or a clone, or an object created from the class, right? And then when I say instantiate, it's the process that we create an object from the class, right? That's what we do when we say instantiate. But other than that, we're not going to talk too much more about this stuff. This is good to know. Built-in JavaScript classes. Function, actually, we've been using function. Actually, a function is a class in JavaScript, which is kind of weird, right? Capital F we're talking about, not lowercase f the way we've been using it, right? So the class function itself is a class, not function lowercase f when we create functions. Okay, that's interesting. Array is a class. We've talked about arrays. Booleans, these are all built-in classes that we can use. String, to determine things, and regular expression, that we can modify. Date, we're going to focus on today. Number and math, those are the three that we're going to talk about in this one. Okay, so here's an example of a function, right? So we have a function, and it says, I want to instantiate an object. We're using a built-in object. We're using a built-in object. I don't know how that always happens right to me. I don't care about Facebook. A built-in object, and the built-in object that we're using is the math object, right? This is the math object, or I'm using I want you to think about it as a static class, right, in your mind. And I'm using this method whenever I use a member of the class. I have to use the .accessor method. This one here, this .accessor. Right, that basically combines the class with the method. So math.py, this is a property, or a constant, if you will, that I'm using that's built into the math class. That's all I'm doing. So it's a value. Math.pow, however, power is actually a method, or that's built into the class math, right? And you can see that it takes two values, right? 1 and 2, right? Whatever the base is, and then to the power of. What's to the power of 2? So r to the power of 2, r squared, right? Math pi, so pi times pi r squared, the area of a circle, right? So that's what this thing does. That's how you use a built-in class. And we've seen those things before. I'm just showing you two again so we can make sure that you don't miss any pieces of this, because we're going to get more complex, like I said. And I'm not going to talk about this. Here's one that's interesting. The date class. I want to create a new date, and the date class has several different. I'm not going to talk about too much about garbage collection here. The date class has several built-in methods. All right. One of them, of course, is date. It creates a date object, right? I can also create a date object with a number of milliseconds, right? And there's other methods that are built into the date class. Get date, get day, get full year, and now, which I use a lot now. Like if I want to know the date today, I can use the now method of the class. Let's try it out, because I think you guys are going to get too bored if I keep doing it this way. So I'm going to fire up Visual Studio Code, and we'll talk about this later on. I'm going to go start off with one of the standard ones we used before. I'm going to use lesson 7. I'm going to just duplicate this one. And I'll put it up on GitHub as well for you guys to follow. So one part of object-oriented JavaScript, I'm going to keep talking while I'm doing this, so not to bore you guys. One part of it is that, and by the way, when I do this kind of stuff, I'm doing the same thing I've done a million times. So please ignore what how this whole thing works. One part of object-oriented JavaScript you have to understand is that we want to use existing objects. Oops, that's up here. Objects or classes that I want to do, right? That's one thing we want to do. We use stuff that someone else has built, like, for example, the built-in classes that exist in JavaScript. Also, somebody else's classes. Like if I want to use the jQuery library, that's using somebody else's classes and libraries, right? And there's a whole group of that looks very comfortable. The whole group of documentation that we can view online is how to use something, and we're going to do that. Okay. We're going to do that later on when we talk about the create.js library, which I'm going to show you near the end of the session here. All right. All right. So what I wanted to do actually was do one of these, and I want to kill. I want to remove my .git folder. Oh, minus RF. And create a new one. Oh, right, I forgot to do that. Monday morning, what can I tell you? So look at 99 changes because I got all this stuff here. One thing I want to do is definitely, before I change something, I want to change this to lesson 8, because that's what we're talking about today. And this is not a review. We're talking about object-oriented. Hi there. Object-oriented JavaScript. We're going to talk about this a bunch of times. It's not the last time we're going to be talking about it. And also in my index.html, I think we're good. But in my app.js, which is here, I want to just get rid of, I'll leave this. This is where we were July 4th today. Can't believe it, July 4th. Other people are off today because of the States. And we don't have that website yet. Well, we're going to get this website in a second. And we're going to wipe all this stuff out because we're going to do some new stuff here. So, oof, all this stuff's gone. Yay. All right, so we're going to do some updates. You see this couple of updates. Change the README file, and I'll say updated project. Updated project. And we're going to combine this with our GitHub. You've seen this stuff, doing this before. So like I said, part of it is using somebody else's code. Part of it is making your own classes and objects. And I want to say classes in a very loose way right now, because they're not the same way that we're used to. So COMP125. I don't know how I think I called it lesson 8. There we go. I'm probably going to shoot myself here for this, but whatever. Doesn't matter. Okay. Okay, so you should have that up now if you want to follow with me. Yay. Yeah, I'll keep that open. And you know what? Might as well get all the Azure stuff done at the same time. Why not? Portal.azure.com. By the way, you may notice sometimes that you may not be able to create more stuff because I think there's a limit to how many things you can create. It's okay. You can always cancel some older stuff you've got on. Like I've got some lessons here that I'll probably end up canceling because you guys have already done those things, right? But let's make it live because it's always good to make it live. And it's good to check to see if there's any changes on stuff. So we'll say COMP125, summer 2016, lesson 8. There we go. And I'm going to use the existing one. We're going to pull down Canada East. And that's good. Pin to dashboard create. Let it do it. Again, you should know how to do all this stuff already. If you don't have access to Azure by now, and some people I know during the exam, they're like, I don't have access to Azure. I'm like, guys, it's like we're deep into the semester already and no access to Azure. Yeah, okay, it's okay to use the school server, but why? Right? Azure is becoming like one of the most popular cloud services out there, and this is a great opportunity this semester for you guys to learn it, right? So is it required? No. Am I going to use it all the time? Yeah, right? So just saying. I mean, it's an opportunity for you guys to get it, and you guys get it for free as students, right? So I don't understand why you wouldn't check it out and use this free trial. Here's my GitHub. Yay. And I'm going to go into, we're going to look at Centennial. And we'll choose a project, which is going to be this one. And yay. And now we should be able to deploy, no problem. And we'll wait till the deployment's done. There we go. Deployment is done. Let's take a look. I want to see that check mark. If I don't see the check mark, it's not done, right? That's really important to look at with Azure. And we'll look at that in a second. And again, I'm a little bit of a stickler, but I want to see this before I check it out, and I should be able to see my site, even though it's pretty empty. It'll just give me a kind of hello exam review. I got to change this up because this is lesson 8, not lesson 7, right? Let's change this now. So I'll go over here and go to here and in here and up here. Instead of it saying exam review, which is what it's not, today it's object-oriented JavaScript, right? I can type would be good. Okay, so object-oriented JavaScript. Now the thing with going live like this, I'm live, right? So there's going to be problems, right? There's always problems when you're doing something live. It's not a planned session. It's not like I've sat there and scripted every piece that I'm talking about. So please bear with me. Well, sometimes we go through this kind of stuff when we're live, and because I'm recording, you're going to see stuff that doesn't make sense or didn't work or doesn't work for you. We'll fix it as we go. Okay, updated index.html. Oops. Go and oops, push. There we go. So that's going to push it up online. Okay, good. So what I want to see is I want to go back into my app.js and I want to create a random number generator like I did before. And we've seen this before. So here's what I want to start doing from now on. One thing I want to do is, by the way, I probably could add website now because I have the website, comp, whatever it is. There. I want to create a function that's going to kind of hold my code. And I want you guys to structure your stuff a little bit differently than we have in the past. So I want to start using functions to compartmentalize the stuff that we do. And what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to get rid of my, well, I don't have to, but I can get rid of my other ones. I'm not going to really use projects too much or about page. I'm going to really focus on my index.html for this one because we're just talking about object-oriented programming. And it's not necessarily switching between pages. We know how to do that. There's different kind of methodologies. But one thing is I want to create a new function that's inside this thing, inside my function. And I want to call it something. And I usually want to call it something like init or start or something like that. Okay? So here's my init function, right? And then what I want to do is on load, right? When window loads, I want to call my function. So as soon as my window loads, my function is being called. All right? Let's try this out. So how do I do that again? Window.add event listener, the load event. When I'm done loading, I want to call my function called init. There it is. And so as soon as my window loads, I'm going to call this initialization function. I want to always do this from now on. So call init method. We'll call it function for now. When window finishes loading. That's what this does, right? And this method is being called. So to test that, of course, I've got to put in some kind of console.log that kind of says, app started. And we did this before. A bit of a review. We've been away for a week. My brain gets weak if you don't program for a week, right? No pun intended there. So this is the thing that works out here. Let's take a look at my index.html and see what happens now. So if I go back to my index.html, let's first of all, this is live. Oh, this is really cool. We've been using HTTP server, right? HTTP server. I got to mark this down, right? HTTP server doesn't work for everybody, right? But there's let's say, but there's another one called Light server. Let's see if this works. Yeah, baby. Light server does work, and it's really cool, actually. Light server, not only does it work, and how do you get light server? npm install -g light-server. Check this out, right? So if I was to look at light server, LITE, so if I go light server npm, for you guys to find this one. There's another module you can download because if you already have Node, it's really cool. You can say, here's what I want to do. You can install it as a development requirement, or -g for global, which is what I did. I kind of made a global installation of Light Server. One thing that it does is it auto loads stuff automatically for you, which is kind of cool. So an example of this would be if I go back to my home page, right? I want to show you this. This is kind of side by side. So here's my home page, and I want to inspect my page. You can see under my console here that it says failed to load resource. That's my favicon, right? Because that's what it's doing, right? Don't worry about that for a second. We can make a favicon, but it says app started, which is really what I want to see, right? And if I want to change this from app started, watch, I'm not reloading my page here. From app started, I want to change this to we'll talk. Let's say application started. Application started. If I save, right, bam, reloads my page right away. Right? See that? I didn't reload my page because light server works differently than HTTP server. Light server is just, again, a little light server, but it keeps a sync between my project and my page, which is kind of cool. It's kind of like an auto reload page, right? Which is really awesome from a development perspective. And an example of that would be, hey, you know, if I want to target, if I go to my index.html as an example, and my container, anything that has a class of, let's say, for example, my lesson 8, I want to call this, want to add an ID, right? That equals to, you know, first h1. Let's make this is my ID. So I want to target this with some JavaScript or some CSS. Watch this. So take a look at this in the background, lesson 8. So I go back to my CSS library, which is my over here, and I want to target that. So I say, well, I want to target, you know, first h1, and I want to change the color of my code to blue, right? And I press save. Bam, it changed to blue, like right away, right? There's no delay, which is really kind of cool to see your changes right, like live, as opposed to for you to go to the page, reload it, try it out. It's too much, many steps. And as developers, we're always trying to find quick and dirty ways to do things faster and faster, right? Because there's so many piece parts to our web process. So download light-server through npm. So npm install light-server. If you have Node installed, you should be able to do this kind of stuff. And if you've done the Bower lab, you should definitely have npm. So you should be able to do this kind of stuff, no problem. I don't like it blue, but we'll leave it like this for now. Who cares? Let's go back to this. So this is one thing. So I want to be able to see my changes up here. Right now it says application started. And what I want to do is when I load up my page, I want to use the math. I want to create a random number, right? I want to be able to position it so that down in here I have some random numbers that are generated between, like I said before, 1 and 6. We've kind of done this before in different programs, but it's interesting to be able to do it here in JavaScript, right? So let's think about how to do this. I need the ability for me to carry the random number in some kind of data element, like a variable, all right? An example would be I have a dice roll from 1 to 6. I know, we've done this before, but I want to illustrate this in a different way today, right? So the dice roll is going to be 2 dice, right? We have 2 6-sided dice we're going to toss at the same time, right? And the first die is going to be from 1 to 6, and the second die is 1 to 6. We add them together, and we're going to have a number between 2 and 12. Okay? So let's try this out. So we'll have 2 variables. We'll do this inside of my init function, where we generate this random number upon load. Okay? So let's do this. So we'll say var die1, right, is equal to, we can do just like this, math random, right? We're going to do from times 6, right, which is 0 to 6, but not including 6. That's what this generates, right? And we want to take this result, right, and add 1 to it. So that's 1 to 6, right? But it's going to give us a funky number between 0.00, blah, 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 really small numbers, all the way to 6. Okay, I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second. So this is the result. And let's do the same thing again for die 2. So here's die 1 and die 2. By the way, there's different ways of writing this, which you can see. And then we have a total, right? My total is equal to die 1 plus die 2, right? We can do that too. That's what this function does. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to do a console log, nothing too funky here, of total. You know what we also want to do here in my console log? Let's print out, you know, dice roll plus total. There we go. And now we have a result of whatever the dice result is. Dice result, maybe I'll put it in there. Sorry. Dice result. Here's my total. Notice that I've updated this. And now that I've updated this, I get a number right away. I don't have to do anything. Bam, it was there, right? I don't have to go try and load it, blah, blah, blah. Light server, man. Light server is the way to go. Okay. I always find new and interesting things to make things go. Okay, but see, this number is ugly, right? 4.06, blah, 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 blah. I don't want that. I want it to be rounded off. And I usually use math.floor for this. By the way, hint, hint, you will have a test that includes random numbers. You will generate random numbers between 1 to 6. It's going to happen on your exam at the end. I'm telling you now, study it, learn it, memorize it. It's going to happen 100%. Not even It's not even like a 1%, 100%. I'm going to put random numbers on your exam at the end. All right, this is like 6 weeks from now, right? I know. People are going to forget. You're going to say, Tom, you never told us. I just told you, right? So I'm going to say math.floor. Here's the way I do this, math.floor, right? And math.floor, I don't want to just do this. I want to do the whole thing, right? So I'm probably going to put this all in brackets here, this whole expression here in brackets. Might as well copy this whole thing just to be lazy. Control-C, Control-V. And once I do Control-S, watch, woo, right? Bam, 8, right? Now I have a number, that goes to 8, right? That's my dice result. And I can keep doing that every time I change anything. It's going to make a result. Well, I want this thing to be tied into a button. I want to make a button, and every time I press that button, I get a result, right? So I want to see something graphically instead of on the console. Makes more sense. So this is the function that I want. I've been testing it here in my init function. But what I want to do is, and I'm using two objects, the math object here, right? And I'm using two methods of the math object, the floor method, which is it rounds down, and the random method, which gives me the pseudo-random number between 0 and 1, right? So I get a 0, 1, multiply that by 6, plus 1, I get a number between 1 and 6. The reason why I'm adding plus 1 is because I never get to 6. I'm up to but not including 6, right? And I add 1 to give me that extra from 1 to 6. Okay, otherwise I get a number from 0 to 5, okay? So this is what this does. Okay, and you're going to say, lovely. Well, what I want to do is my init function sets everything up, but I want to have a way of a button. When I click on the button, generates the number for me, and I can do it over and over again. I think it's important for us to know how to do that. All right, so let's do some basic HTML. So we got some empty stuff in here, right? Let's go over here. And what I want to do in here is I want to create a button, and I know that I want to create a Bootstrap button, right? Bootstrap buttons are use Bootstrap classes. There's different ways of doing this. I can use the button element. So the button, I can actually type button like this, right? I can do that. Or I can use an anchor tag, right? So I can go anchor tag. Oh, that's not what I wanted. I can use an anchor tag, right? So anchor tag, right? And with my anchor tag, I can put in an href value. Here's my href, whatever it is, and then my button itself will do something. I want to just use a button, so let's use a button, and I want to attach a class for the Bootstrap class of btn. That's the button for Bootstrap with button dash primary. Okay, so that's the one I want to use. And what this does is it creates a button like this. See on the screen automatically. I need a label for the button, and that's going to say something like roll. There's my roll button, or maybe I can type roll properly. There we go. There's my roll button. So when I click on the roll button now, what I want it to do, see how it keeps on generating a different number, right? When I click on the roll button, right, I want to be able to generate a number, right? So the next thing I need to do is someplace where the result is going to be, right? And usually I want to use some kind of div tag to do that. So here's my div tag. I want to give it a ID of result, right? There's my ID, and this is where my result is going to flow, right in here, right? You could also make this a label. There's many ways to do this thing, all right? Doesn't matter. For now, it's just going to be here. That's where my result is going to appear, right? Inside, just underneath the button. Right now, actually, it's going to be beside the button, right? Because the way I've written it, the button is a block element, and chances are the result is going to be right next to it. Let's see how this works. Okay, so my roll button does that. So what I want to do on the JavaScript side is when I click the button, listen to my words here, I click the button, I generate a result, right? What do I need to do? When I click the button, what am I listening for? The click event, right? So I can tag into the button because I know the button is called what? Do I have a ID for the button? No, I could search for the first button. I could do like a, document.query selector, look for the first button, and then do it that way. Or I could look for the name, which is probably the most common way to do that. For example, this is the roll button. I might as well give this an ID of roll button. ID is equal to roll button, right? Just to give it something of a description. Now I have an ID. I have a hook. I can hook into the button like we talked about before, right? And now I can create that event listener, right? So I'm going to go back to app.js as an example. And inside this, I want to create an event listener for the button. Now, I can do it side by side with my init function, right? I don't have to do it in here because it's asynchronous. Whenever I create an event, it happens on its own thread, its own process, right? All events, there's the main thread, the main process that runs the entire program. I want you to think of it this way. And every time I do an event, it happens on its own process, separate from anything else. Once I create that event, JavaScript is always listening for any kind of event that happens, the one that I'm binding to my button. Okay, I'm creating a binding. Let's check this out. So I'm going to go, first of all, I need to hook into the button, right? And what I want to probably do is in here, right, above my function, right, I'm going to create a var role button is equal to document.getElement by ID, and it's going to be called role button, right? There it is. So I've created a hook into my button now, right? There's the role button HTML element. And now down here, I can create that event. I can say role button dot add event listener on click. What do I want it to do? I want it to do something. Now I could initialize again, but that doesn't make any sense. I want to make my own, roll the dice, function. So right now I'm going to call it dice roll. So it's going to be dice roll, right? I don't have a dice roll method. It doesn't give me an error because JavaScript doesn't give you an error, right? But here's my dice roll method. Notice that there's an uncaught exception when I save because there is no dice roll method, right? Let's create that method. Now you can do it after or before. Let's do it before. There's my dice roll. And my dice roll method is going to do just this. Okay? So this is what this is going to do. And I want it to do, for now, I want it to print, to the console. So let's cut it from here and put it here. There it is. And we'll just format everything so it looks nice. There we go. And now every time I click the button, it's going to call my dice roll method, right? There we go. And here's my application started. When I click the roll button, it's going to keep on generating my number, right? For every time I click it. Now this is all works, which is nice, right? It didn't take long for me to make a little dice roller. Well, you know what? I don't want to do it here on my console anymore, right? That was my nice test. I want to do it inside my the area here where I have dice result, right? Remember I called it dice result or result? So I have to hook into my result here, right? So how do I do that? Again, go back to app.js, go back up here, right? And just like I made the roll button, I want to create another area that says result. We got to be careful here. What I really mean is dice result. And what I want to do is change it later on. I want to rename that. I won't even call it dice result. I want to change it on my code. I like to be, that was weird. I like to be, kind of make everything work together. And let me show you this what I'm talking about here. I mean that if I call it dice result, it's going to be called dice result in both places, just so that way I know what I'm hooking into. Do I have to do it this way? No, I don't. I choose to do it this way because it makes more sense to me. Okay, so I've got a couple of hooks. So these two variables, these are references to HTML elements. That's what they are, right? That only works for pages that have a roll button and a dice result. If I try to do this on an about page, give me an error. Contact page, give me an error, because I don't have those things, and I'm not filtering for which page I'm on. I'm just doing it for index.html for now, okay? Just FYI. All right, cool. So what I want to do is, I don't want to just do the console. I don't want to do a dice result on the console anymore. I want to do a dice result in the dice result area, right? So what do I want to do? I want to say dice result. Now, do I want to do inner HTML? Probably, right? So let's do a dice result inner HTML, right? Is equal to, and again, what's my HTML going to look like? I have a div tag. I need to put this in somewhere. It could be in a paragraph tag. It could be an H2 element, something. Let's make it an H2. It's not really nice, but what the hell? H2. Right? And we'll put in the result of the dice. So H2 plus the result that I'm going to get, which is my total, right? So plus total, plus, and then whatever else I'm going to get, which is my closing tag for my H2, right? So H2. forming up my H2, right? So this is my H2 tag. So whenever I click the roll button, it's going to, here's something interesting. It's going to replace my inner HTML of the dice result area, right? It's going to replace it with this other H2 tag. That's what's happening. Because remember, whenever I click inner HTML, it replaces what's ever in there with whatever I'm typing in here. So my total is going to change every time. So if this worked, then I should be able to do something like this. And you can see that I'm going to get a random number between 2 and 12 over and over again. Questions? All I'm showing here, I'm just demonstrating the use of a built-in class, the math.random class, and the math.floor method, right? That basically rounds down to get a number between 2 and 12. And it's pretty good. Okay? Let's upload that one. So if you want to check out the code, I'm going to put it up on GitHub. So I'll add those in. Added or demoed math.random. Here we go. On this particular commit, you'll see that. Okay, and it's going to go up there, and then it'll be up on Azure. We'll check it up. We'll see how it works on Azure. It doesn't even work on Azure, right? We're doing it here, but it's always nice to check what it looks like live. Always, 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 right? Because one thing, the way we think about it on one hand, it looks like locally it works, but remotely, sometimes it doesn't work, right? Let's check it out. Roll. Yeah, looks pretty good on Azure too, right? So that's pretty cool. And it was pretty fast. Like you saw how, you know, after I updated, I get a roll. Let's talk about the year. So what I want to do is I got my roll, and I want to put in the exact time, a timestamp for every time I roll the dice. Next to my die roll, my die result, I want to stamp down exactly when things happen. Okay? How do I do this? Well, again, remember that we have to create a new date object. Like, for example, my Independence Day, which is today, actually, July 4th, right? You know, which is kind of weird. But, you know, we have to think about this. If I want to create a new date, so I have to create a new date object. This is a little different than what we've done with random. Random is a static method that we're using. Date, in order for us to have a date and assign a date, right, we need to create a new date object, okay? There's different ways to do this. And I'll show you the difference. If I say something like this, if I say, well, you know, var, let's try this out, var today, right, is equal to, you know, my new date object is equal to new date object, my new date dot now, right? Can I do that? A now method? Is it a now method? Can I do this? Date dot now, can I? And if you look at it, if I want to see what it looks like live, remember that it'll tell me that this is a great thing. It'll tell me if there's an error right away, right, with this one. It says intermediate value now is not a function, right? Okay. So I can't do this, but I can do this, right? So if I do this, we're okay. See that there's no error. I'm going to take this away for a second so you can see it a little bit more clearly, right? So here's the website, and here's me, new date, right? So today, but that's not really accurate. That's date today, and I want to do today.now, right? Is what I really want to do, right? Okay, which doesn't make any sense, but we'll see what I'm talking about here. So when I click my init, when my initialization happens, let's do another little console.log to test it. This is my little experiment, right? Console.log. And if I want to print out today, right, just by itself, the way it is, what do I get? Monday, July 4th, 2016. I don't have to do today.now, right? The default gives me the exact time right now in GMT time, right? We notice that it's 9:27. GMT minus 4, tries to find where I am, so Eastern Standard Daylight Time or whatever. It tries to figure this out and give me my date format right on here. So this is like almost like a timestamp just by doing this, right? How about if I did today now? Can I do that? Is that possible? Is that even a function, right? So no, right? Even though, remember my thing here, date.now, or is it a value? Is it a property like this? Oops. Oh, yeah, undefined. There is no, even though I went to date.now, right? How about if I just do date now? Date.now. right? How about I do this, right? Now, okay. Now, that gives it to me in milliseconds. That's the date right now in milliseconds. So that works, right? Date now is built in, but it's not. It's different than the date object, right? Notice that the date object also takes 3 constructors. Three overloaded constructors. It says date plus 3 overloads, right? Well, let's figure out what that is. If I go date and open up the bracket, you can see that the 3 overloads are date with a value number, date with a string, right? And date, year, month, date, which I saw already. I can kind of program in the date, and it'll convert it into a date format, right? Well, okay, that's interesting. If today is a date, can I do something like today? Do I have the ability to do anything else with it? Like, today is a date, right? Can I do anything with the date? Can I put in like, date.now? Do that, and you'll see that the answer is no, right? Because today, all the value that it serves is that it's a date object. Let's go back. So remember, you have to understand how these things work, right? We want to use these things. Remember, date is, if you look at the date, it says retrieves and manipulates dates and times, right? So again, when I do a date by itself, it creates a date object that contains the current date and time provided by the device. So this is my computer providing the time. That's what it's doing, right? If I put a date in milliseconds, it creates a date object based on the number of milliseconds that have elapsed since midnight, January 1, 1970, right? So if I put date now, that would work, right? Because I did that earlier. Or I would just give me the exact same time, right? If I can also put in a date string, right? So it creates a date object based on a string containing a date value. Now you got to be careful about the string. An example of this would be if I go back. It's really specific. So let's say if I go back to today, and if I go in here and I put in a string, so here's my string value of whatever the date's going to be. Like for example, 2016 dash, I don't know, 0101. That's January 1st, right? Is this the right way of doing it? Let's take a look at what I get in the date. December 31st, 2015. That didn't quite work exactly like I wanted. At 7 o'clock, right? That's just kind of weird. That's what I got. Like, right? Definitely not today, right? But it's. I mean, did I do what I wanted to do? Kind of. I was close. I tried to do January 1st, 2016, but I got a weird number. How about if I did something like this? If I said 12:01, right? What does it give me? November 30th. 2016 at, it's kind of weird. What about, can I pass in other values? And what's my date format in JavaScript? So date format JavaScript, right? It's important to understand how to make these things work, right? Or else you're never going to know, right? So again, if you notice that I did this already, right? But I want to put it's also a date and time. Notice that it has T for the separator, right? Date plus hours, minutes, and seconds. So T for the separator plus the time that I want it to be. So 12 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning on whatever it is. I can put whatever I want in there. Let's try this out. So I want to put T as time, right? So let's try this out. So I go here, T, and then I want to put it so it's like, I don't know, 1 o'clock in the morning on December 1st, right? So let's try this out. So 1 o'clock. There you go. And see what that does. Let's go back to here and see what I get. Get some really weird. How come? It's Eastern Standard Time, but it's -5, and that's why I'm getting December 21st at like 8 o'clock. So how do I specify what I want? What the exact time is, right? Let's go back. So again, it says UTC Universal Time Coordinate is the same as GMT, right? So what version, what do I want to get from it? And there's ways of specifying different date values. Be very careful because the thing that you may think you're getting is not what you're getting. Here's a more complete date. So again, 9:56 GMT plus 1, right? Now we aren't that. We are, if I go back to what I did before, so let's just wipe this out for a second. I'll put it back. If I just did this, If I go back to here, I get this, right? This is a good indicator of what we want to do. So if I copy this format, right, which is GMT 0400 minus 0400, like this, and I go back to this, just to get an idea, because this is just our local time. That's why it's giving me some weird value. So we'll say 2016. So the date, the year first, 12-01, right, time. And then, for example, I want it to be 0100 in the morning. And then I want to add in those coordinates, so GMT 0400. Let's see what that gives us now, right? It says invalid date. I love it. Invalid date and time. It's invalid, right? Invalid date. So how do I specify the date in our specific time frame? Right? If you notice back here, if I was to take this time frame, so if I take this whole thing, look how it does it. I'm even specifying this whole thing right here, European Standard Time, right? And I go back here and put it in. Oops, I meant to go back here and put in this time. Following the example that's online, right? Good, right? Wednesday, March 2015. Da 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 da. So there is a specific format. I just can't just be guessing, right? So GMT. So whenever I use GMT or anything like that, I can't use the T. T is only when I want to use the time and a local time. I can't do it that way. And there's a whole suite of ways of doing it. So if I just take this away, let's just take this away and see what happens. Does that still work? Yes. EDT, right? And look what it does. It converts it to 0400, right? 0 plus 100. And if I go minus 0400, let's see if that works. Right. So good. EDT. And now if I change my date, so instead of Wednesday, March 25th, 2015, and if I change it to what I want, which is 2016-12-1, good, right? But look at the time, 9:56 Eastern Standard Time, 0400. I love it. Questions on the date? Date format is kind of weird to work with. It's always I got someone sleeping in the corner there. I bored the crap out of you guys. It's kind of like the I'll be honest with you. It's kind of the thing that's funky to work with. But if I want an example would be example would be if it worked out to be if I want to take a look at the elapsed seconds between now and the previous date, right? So every time I click the button, as I'm running the program, I want it to know what the current date is and the last date, right? Now remember, I'm not reloading the page, so this could keep track of how long it takes between steps. Every time I click the button, it'll tell me what the date is, right? And I want to be able to timestamp it. So let's do this. Let's create our time object, right? Well, if that's true, and I created a new date, and I'm printing out the date today, notice that today's date is the exact time, 9:36 on July 4th, right? And again, if I really wanted to, I can copy this whole line here, put it in, it would work with this this standard way of doing things. So what I want to do is every time I click the button, I want to kind of take a timestamp and put it next to the date, right? How do I do that? And the first thing is, where would I put it, right? So I want to be able to make a kind of a space. So there's my total, and then the space, and then the time, and it's going to be over here. So next to the roll, it's going to be a timestamp over here that's going to appear of my date. Now, or I can do it below, whatever I feel like doing, right? For me, I'm going to kind of do it to the side. I'm going to kind of put plus today. So I'm going to say plus today, right? That's what I'm going to do. And maybe a plus. That'd be nice too. There we go. And so when I click the button now, you can see that it's kind of printing out, a number. And here's the problem. Do you see that the time is the same? Look, time changing. Why? Because today, when I do a new date, it's being captured, right, one time here. Like I won't capture this over and over again. It only captures it once, right? Because when I create my object, I create my date based on the time frame that I captured it. So again, I mean, I'm creating an object that says today, right? What I really want to do, I don't want to do this. What I really want to do is I want to add in a new date object. That's what I want to do. So I want to plus do the new date object right inside there. So every time I do a new date object, every time I click the dice roll, I want to kind of put my new date object in there. Now, obviously, it's not going to work this way. Why? Because I'm using the new keyword, right? I'm using the new keyword to do this, and it doesn't like it when I try and calculate something that's part of a string. It doesn't like that. But I could do something like this. Var today, or now, is equal to new date, right? And I can put in now in here, right, and put a new date in here. So every time I click the button, right, still doesn't like that. There's now, right? What did I make a mistake? Today is not defined. Oh, I love it. Do you see that? I don't see that. What am I using today? Oh. Probably could have worked. Probably would have worked. Okay, so if I do this, you can see that it's going to work now. And as I go, see the time changes all the time as I work. You can see the difference in dates as I click the button. Now, what about if I don't want all this stuff? I just want the time. How do I do that? Well, so all I want is the time, and I don't want a date. There's the time zones to do that. So I only want the time, not the date, right? How do I figure that out? Now it says, remember, JavaScript will also accept year, month, day. You can do it this way. It'll try and detect what you're doing. I just want the the time. How do I do that? So again, the short dates, long dates, all this kind of stuff. If I go into the function for it, if I go back to PowerPoint, and you can see the date milliseconds, right? But I want the time. All I care about is the hours, minutes, and seconds, right? For the year, month, and date, right? Well, there's other functions down here that do that. For example, getDate returns the date of the date object, right? GetDay returns the day of the date object. GetFullYear, get hours, okay? Get milliseconds, right? I could do that as well. So the hours of a date object, so hours, minutes, and seconds, I could do that. How about getTime? That would be pretty cool. That's what I really want, right? All right. So let's try this out. I'm going to go back to here and go over here. And now what I want to do is I want to go now, my date object, right? Can I go now dot get time? And yes, I can, right? Let's see if that actually works, right? So here we go. So I click onto it, and I get some funky number, right? What is this? It's in milliseconds. It's the time between now and like 1970, right? In time, I got to convert this into a format, right? Into a number format, right? Remember, it says returns the time, which is the time of the date object, right? But in milliseconds, that's what it returns, right? I can also set date and so on, set month. I can set time. I can do all those kind of things. What I want to do is convert it to string, right? So that's definitely what I want to do. So get time, and then I want to do kind of something like, you know, toString, my toString method. Oops. See what that does. So still, it's a string, but who cares, right? Well, it was a string already. It was already converted. Whenever I added these together, it became a string. But how do I convert? How do I convert it back into a time, right? So again, if I was going to look it up, so time, JavaScript. If I go to the getTime method, it gives me a number, but I don't want that. I want it to convert it to a string, and now it says minutes is 1,000 times 60. You know, as an example, calculate the number of years since 1970, right? Here's the year value, math.round, date.get time. So I get a new date based on my new date value and so on. I can do it this way, but I want to be able to take that millisecond value and convert it to minutes and seconds and all that kind of stuff. Well, how do I do that? So the time, my time value, not necessarily, this is the time since 1970. All right, so that's not really what it is. Anyone else have any suggestions out there? Come on, guys. I'm just doing the demo, and you guys are just watching. And get day of the year, and let's take a look at something that makes more sense to us. Get local day. But what I really want is to find the milliseconds. This is time in milliseconds. Like if I go back to here, how does this time help us? And if I click it, by the way, if I click it over and over again, you can see that the day value doesn't change, but the milliseconds continues to change, right? I can roll, and this value is going to continue to roll out, whatever it is, right? So how do I do that? How do I change the date and time values? Well, let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll figure it out, right?